Gary, have you hammered this area?
No, I haven't, Marty, because it's so rough. It's as rough as a...
So we'll watch what the grad's bringing up and what that material is.
Yeah, that's going to be... This is a type of thing that would be carried by a British soldier.
Vanessa Lucido didn't just uncover old wood. She discovered something far more intriguing. Deep underground was a tunnel built using timber that clearly didn't come from nearby. The wood had been transported from a distant place, carefully used to construct something hidden beneath the surface. This wasn't random digging. She was following a deliberate plan. Every rock, every marking felt like a clue left behind. And when her drill struck a hidden lid buried deep in the earth, everything began to shift. It all started with a strange underground void, a hollow, vault-like space in the swamp. It was empty, but not in a meaningless way. It felt like something had once been there, or was meant to be. Quiet, eerie, and full of mystery. When Rick Lagina saw it, he didn't need to say much. One look was enough to signal the team. It was time to act. But the space wasn't as empty as it seemed. One team member immediately switched into full research mode. No hesitation. Instead of digging blindly, she directed Doug, Judy, and Terry to search through historical records. Their hunt led them to an old museum in Connecticut, packed with dusty archives and forgotten documents. Exactly the kind of place where secrets linger. Her focus turned to Fred Nolan's theory that Oak Island might not hold just one treasure, but several. Hidden within layers of history and clues could be something significant. During their research, they came across William B. Goodwin, a businessman who had spent years collecting notes about Oak Island. Among his papers was a hand-drawn map, his version of an older, possibly original sketch. This map didn't show just one location, it pointed to 3. It wasn't perfect, more like a copy of a copy, but it contained markings and landmarks that were hard to ignore. At first glance, it seemed questionable, until the team began finding those exact markers in real life. They followed the map to the first location, a large flat rock carved with a bold X. Not a faint mark, but a deep, deliberate carving, as if someone had clearly marked a spot to dig. And there it was, exactly where the map indicated. Despite scanning the area, they found no metal. Still, the match was undeniable. They moved to the second marker, another stone marked with an X and square grooves. Once again, it was right where the map said it would be. Yet again, no signal from the detectors. No treasure, but the pattern was holding. Then came the oddly named Kidney Bean Rock, a stone shaped just like its name, located a specific distance inland. It sounded almost absurd until they found it exactly as described. Still no metal, but by now it was clear. The map wasn't a joke. Finally, they reached the last marker, a split rock, described as if it had been struck apart by lightning. And there it was, cracked clean down the middle. This time, the metal detector responded. A steady signal. Something real. They began digging and uncovered a piece of iron, thick, old, and clearly forged long ago. It wasn't modern scrap. It looked like a tool, possibly a tunneling spike used for underground work. Suddenly, the clues began to connect. This wasn't just a search, it was a puzzle. The carved rocks, the shaped stone, the buried spike, everything pointed to careful planning. Someone had placed these markers intentionally, leaving behind a trail. Not random, not accidental, deliberate. Even without finding treasure, the evidence was compelling. It showed that people had been there long ago, working with purpose, hiding or searching for something important. Back at base, there was no celebration, just focus. Every rock had matched the map. Every clue had been confirmed. Now the real question was, what were they all pointing to? The team cleared more land and searched around the split rock, but found no additional signals. That didn't mean there was nothing left. It meant the clue had already been uncovered. Perhaps the rocks weren't marking a single location, but forming a path, a silent message laid out across the land. She had the team remeasure everything, distances, angles, positions. The map wasn't just directions, it was a calculation. a system designed to guide only those who understood it. Using the 3 key markers, the carved X, the grooved stone, and the bean-shaped rock, they drew a line and extended it beyond the split rock. That extension pointed to a new area, one that had never been explored before. It didn't stand out. It looked ordinary, which is exactly why it had been overlooked. She marked the spot and ordered the crew to begin. Trees were cleared, machines moved in, and the ground was prepared for another dig. The air carried a mix of anticipation and risk. Because if the pattern held true, they weren't just digging randomly anymore. They were getting closer to something that had been carefully hidden for a very long time. They started digging. The machines roared as dirt was thrown aside. The first day passed with nothing. The second day, still nothing. By the third day, they finally uncovered something, a small wooden plank. It was decayed but clearly hand-cut and buried deep underground. Then came another plank and another. Soon it became clear they had found the remains of a wooden tunnel, or possibly a collapsed shaft. Timber after timber appeared, carefully placed and long hidden beneath the surface. Vanessa stood nearby, arms crossed, watching as fragments of history emerged piece by piece. Finding the spike had been important, but the ground clearly had more to reveal. As they dug deeper, the pattern became obvious. This wasn't natural. Someone had built this. It was either a structure or the entrance to something much larger. Water slowly began to seep in, not rapidly, but steadily enough to complicate things. The team pumped it out and kept going. Around the 10th layer, they hit something different. A dull, solid sound. Not wood, not rock. Something heavier. As they cleared it, they revealed a flat, round lid. It looked like stone or possibly metal, and it wouldn't move easily. Vanessa called in heavier equipment. They drilled around it, loosened the edges, and eventually managed to shift one corner. Beneath it was darkness. A shaft lined with wood extended further down. It wasn't safe enough to send someone inside, so they lowered a camera instead. The screen flickered before stabilizing. Inside was more timber, forming a tight tunnel. A horizontal beam cut across the view, and in one corner, something faintly reflected the light. Not shining, just enough to catch attention. Vanessa stayed focused. No assumptions, just action. She ordered the team to carefully map everything, every beam, every inch of the structure. By the end of the week, they had identified a completely new dig zone. It wasn't marked on any previous maps. The only things linking it were Goodwin's sketch and Vanessa's instincts. This wasn't speculation anymore. It was real, something constructed, hidden, and possibly still holding what they'd been searching for all along. Vanessa didn't slow down. She brought in additional support and began comparing Goodwin's map with modern drone scans. That's when she noticed something unusual. Alignments between the marked rocks and old flood tunnels. Connections no one had considered before. The more data they analyzed, the clearer the picture became. The island wasn't random, it was designed. Each stone wasn't just a marker, but part of a larger system, like points in a web. When viewed together, they formed patterns, almost like constellations that only make sense from the right perspective. She brought in surveyors and mathematicians, experts who could find order in complexity. They discovered repeating distances and geometric relationships. This wasn't guesswork, it was precise. A kind of hidden math embedded in the landscape. By the time autumn arrived, Vanessa had redrawn the excavation map 3 times, each version more refined than the last. They uncovered another wooden tunnel, shallower this time, but just as old. More signals followed, pointing in new directions. There was still no treasure, no gold or chests, but the evidence kept building, layer by layer, proof that something had been deliberately hidden here long ago. Vanessa didn't need to find treasure to prove her point. She already had. And when the final discovery comes, it won't be luck. It will be because someone followed the clues correctly. Meanwhile, over in the North Swamp, things were getting unusual. As they dug, pieces of wood started surfacing. But these weren't random debris. They had clean cuts and sharp edges, clearly shaped by tools. It looked like crafted timber from centuries ago. Then came a surprising find, a wooden stake driven straight through an old board. This wasn't natural. It was intentional, placed there by human hands long ago. Experts began offering theories. Laird Niven stayed composed, though even he seemed impressed. He brought in Ian Spooner to test the wood. If it dated back to the 1500s, it could align with early European exploration in Nova Scotia, when French, Portuguese, and English explorers were navigating largely uncharted territory. It raised the possibility that Oak Island had been visited far earlier than many believed. The discoveries continued. More planks appeared, arranged in a way that looked almost like a pathway across the swamp. It didn't look random. It looked planned, as if someone had built a route to transport something heavy or valuable. Back in the war room, the focus shifted from strategy to interpretation. Terry DeVoe from the research team arrived with a collection of old documents. He spoke about William B. Goodwin, a lesser-known but serious treasure researcher who had gathered extensive material on Oak Island. Terry had gone through dozens of boxes of Goodwin's archived notes stored in a Connecticut museum. Among them was a map, not the original, but a copy based on one created by Fred Blair, another figure in the island's long treasure hunting history. This map pointed to 3 locations on the west side of the island, specifically Lot 1 and Lot 21, areas once owned by the McInnes family. The team didn't hesitate. They followed the map's clues and began searching Lot 1. The first marker was a stone carved with an X. Gary Drayton scanned it, but found nothing. They located another marked rock. Again, no signal. A third attempt yielded the same result. No gold, no silver, not even scrap metal. Still, they pressed on. Over at Lot 5, things started to get more interesting. Archaeologist Fiona Steele noticed unusual features near what appeared to be an old brick kiln. Soon, they began uncovering artifacts that seemed historically significant. Glass fragments, pearlware pottery, rosehead spikes, and glazed bricks that looked remarkably refined. Rick Lagina pointed out how unusual it was to find so many bricks, especially when no full brick structure had ever been confirmed on the island. There had been rumors, dating back to Fred Nolan's time, about a possible brick-making site, but no one had fully investigated it. Now, it seemed possible that parts of the island had once been used for industrial purposes, hidden beneath layers of time. Gary also recalled finding swages in the same area, tools typically used in metalworking or mining. Nearby, they uncovered a large slab of slate, clearly not an ordinary rock, and likely placed there with intention. All signs pointed to the same conclusion. This island held far more than random debris. It carried the remains of organized, purposeful activity, evidence of people who had come prepared, worked carefully, and left behind a mystery that was only now beginning to unfold. This wasn't just an ordinary rock. It had been carved, shaped, and clearly pulled from the ground with purpose. The type of slate they found only exists on the west side of the island, which raised an important question. If people had been mining it in the past, they weren't just searching for gold. They were building something. That idea tied back to William B. Goodwin, a man with bold theories and an even bolder imagination. He once bought land in New Hampshire, now known as America's Stonehenge, and claimed it had been built by Irish monks long before Columbus. To support his ideas, he even rearranged stones to fit his narrative, overlooking clear evidence, like drill marks from the 1800s, that contradicted him. Archaeologists dismissed his claims, and indigenous histories were largely ignored in his version of events. Still, Goodwin had enough charisma to gain attention. He published books, gave interviews, and presented his theories as truth. He passed away in the 1950s without ever finding treasure, but he left behind a mix of clues, some valuable, others questionable. Even as activity in the swamp slowed, it was clear the island still had more to reveal, far beyond just buried gold. Oak Island wasn't simply a mystery anymore. It was beginning to look like a carefully designed puzzle, created by people who knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't just bury something and walk away. They planned, engineered, and possibly concealed everything with intention. That's what made this search different. The team wasn't just chasing stories, they were uncovering a system. Vanessa Lucido recognized this early on. That's why she approached the excavation differently. She wasn't there to casually explore or rely on legends. She brought in heavy machinery and a focused strategy: dig deep, test thoroughly, and connect every piece of evidence. For her, it wasn't about luck. It was about method and persistence. While others were still caught up in theories and old tales, Vanessa focused on tangible results, and it paid off. Deep underground, her team uncovered carefully shaped wooden structures, beams, walls, and tunnel components that were clearly man-made. These weren't natural formations. They were part of something constructed long ago, like a hidden underground system designed to last. As the discoveries grew, Vanessa brought in experts, historians and specialists who could interpret symbols and patterns. What they found was intriguing. Some markings resembled symbols associated with the Freemasons, a group historically known for using geometry and symbolism in their designs. Additional evidence seemed to support this idea. Tools similar to those described in old Masonic texts were uncovered. Stones bore markings that looked like coded symbols. Even the layout of certain tunnels resembled structured pathways, moving from one space to another in a way that suggested purpose, not randomness. Suddenly, the island felt like more than just a place hiding treasure. It felt like it was telling a story, one involving knowledge, design, and possibly shared beliefs encoded into the varial art itself. Vanessa wasn't just uncovering objects, she was uncovering intent. Every new discovery suggested that whoever built this wasn't just hiding wealth. They may have been preserving ideas, messages, or even warnings, using stone and structure instead of written records. And the deeper they dug, the more complex the story became. Each clue led to another. A stone pointed to a symbol. A chamber revealed a pattern. A tool hinted at a larger system. Piece by piece, the island began to reveal not a treasure map, but something closer to a blueprint. Even the materials told a story. Some of the wood used in the tunnels came from trees not native to the island. That meant resources had been brought in from far away. Whoever built this had access to materials, knowledge, and likely a team of skilled workers. This wasn't sluchine activity, it was organized and deliberate. More symbols emerged from the ground: circles, triangles, stars, carved into beams and etched into stones. Many were positioned in places where light would strike them at specific angles, almost as if the island itself had been designed to reveal these details under the right conditions. It began to feel like the entire site was more than a hiding place. It was a kind of stage, built from earth and rock, waiting to be understood. Vanessa started mapping everything, not just individual discoveries, but how they connected. Each tunnel, each stone, each marking was documented and placed into a larger framework. Slowly, what once seemed like chaos began to take shape. It wasn't just a dig site anymore, it resembled a system, almost like an ancient mechanism built into the Ard itself. To better understand it, she brought in specialists, coders, cryptographers, and mathematicians. They began identifying patterns and ratios that aligned with principles of sacred geometry, like the golden ratio and Fibonacci sequences. The design was too precise to be accidental. Artifacts also began to surface: pieces of leather, rusted tools, fragments of fabric, and even bits of preserved parchment sealed in oil. None of it was flashy, but all of it carried significance. Some items appeared older than expected, possibly dating back to times when people weren't even believed to have reached the island. Then there was the mysterious shaft, one that had been overlooked for years. While most efforts had focused on the center of the island, Vanessa shifted her attention elsewhere, toward a lesser-known location, identified only as SOX. What she saw there wasn't just another patch of Ard. It looked like the beginning of something bigger, a story that might go beyond the legend itself. And as the team prepared to explore further, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about finding treasure anymore. It was about uncovering the truth behind a carefully constructed mystery, one that had been waiting centuries to be understood. The truth buried near 10X may be far more shocking than anyone ever imagined. Whatever lies beneath that area has the potential to challenge long-held beliefs about history itself. Over time, many people have dismissed 10X as nothing more than an old, unsuccessful experiment. A site where Dan Blankenship once took huge risks in his search. But Vanessa Lucido sees it very differently. Standing there among rusted equipment, decaying wood, and the remains of past efforts, she didn't see failure. She saw possibility. To her, it felt like unfinished work. 10X wasn't just a side project. It was a lifelong mission. Dan Blankenship spent over 40 years digging there, driven by determination and a belief that something important was hidden below. He didn't start with advanced tools or major funding, just persistence and a deep conviction that others didn't share. Vanessa immediately recognized how sharp his instincts were. There was a moment when he looked at her equipment and understood something in seconds that would take others much longer to grasp. It wasn't guesswork. He seemed certain. And that kind of certainty doesn't come easily. No one dedicates decades of their life pushing through danger and difficulty without a strong reason. Dan and his son pushed the shaft to depths close to 200 feet, an incredible achievement, especially given the limited technology available at the time. Still, despite all that effort, 10X never revealed a clear answer. No confirmed treasure, no final discovery. And maybe that's exactly why it remains so compelling. It's unfinished. Vanessa understands this. That's why she's not just curious about 10X, she's determined to revisit it. In her view, the area still holds unanswered questions, not just physical remains, but signs of intentional human activity. Evidence that people once came here with a purpose, not by accident. Nothing about the site suggests casual use. The layout, the tools, and the scattered remnants all point to something complex and carefully planned. But what makes things even more intriguing is what lies beyond 10 times, toward the wooded area behind the money pit. For years, this quiet stretch of land was mostly ignored. It doesn't look remarkable, and it doesn't immediately suggest hidden treasure. But that might be exactly why it matters. Oak Island has a history of misleading searchers, drawing attention to obvious locations while hiding answers in plain sight. Vanessa believes the quieter areas may hold the real clues. Recent discoveries seem to support that idea. Items like small ruby fragments, pieces of ornate jewelry, a cross, and even preserved parchment have been found scattered across the island, not just in the money pit. Some were buried deep, others closer to the surface, but all of them were unexpected. One of the most striking finds was a worn shoe heel dated back to 1492, the era of Christopher Columbus. Finding something like that, buried beneath untouched layers of earth on a remote island, raises serious questions. It suggests that people may have been there far earlier than commonly believed. As the team continued their work, it became clear that Oak Island might not tell just one story. The famous money pit may not be the main focus after all. It could simply be one part of a much larger narrative. If that's true, then the areas Vanessa is focusing on, 10X and the woods behind the pit, could hold some of the most important answers. The wooded area, in particular, has started to draw attention. On the surface, it appears ordinary, just trees, uneven ground, and the occasional path. But when viewed from above, the layout begins to reveal patterns. The positioning of features suggests intentional design, not randomness. Vanessa, who has extensive experience working with excavation and Allard, has noticed something unusual here. The ground behaves differently. The readings from her equipment don't match expectations. It's as if something beneath the surface has remained undisturbed for centuries. The most interesting discoveries in this area aren't the flashy ones. They're the subtle, out-of-place objects. Things that don't quite belong. Fragments of garnet and pieces of deep green jade have been found. Materials that appear shaped by human hands rather than natural processes. These weren't located in the main excavation zones, but further back where little attention had been given before. Then there was the piece of parchment, fragile, aged, and buried so deeply it shouldn't have survived. It carried no visible markings, yet its very existence hinted at literacy and careful record-keeping by whoever had been there. Another discovery was a weathered cross, clearly shaped, but worn enough to remain mysterious. It wasn't found in a place of worship or within any known structure. It seemed out of context, as though it had been dropped during an event more significant than simple devotion. That's what makes these findings so compelling. They aren't just artifacts. They feel like fragments of a story that doesn't quite fit together, like pieces placed in the wrong order or clues intentionally hidden. Vanessa doesn't always say it outright, but her approach makes it clear. She believes there's more than one history buried on Oak Island, and the evidence supports that idea. The island doesn't behave like a site with a single past. Instead, it feels layered, each layer created at a different time, by different people, for different reasons. And with every new discovery, that layered mystery becomes harder to ignore. Here's where things start to challenge everything we think we know about the timeline. Among the discoveries was a shoe heel dated to the year 1492. That's not just an old artifact, it's a powerful clue. 1492 is the year Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic, a date often seen as the beginning of European contact with the New World. So finding an object from that exact time, buried deep beneath untouched layers of art on Oak Island, raises a serious question. Were people here earlier than history tells us? And if they were, why is there so little record of it? A pattern begins to emerge. It's not just about hiding objects, it's about obscuring time itself. Whoever placed these items may have intended for them to be found, but not easily, not all at once. Just enough to confuse, to mislead, to send people in different directions. It's like following a trail of clues through a forest filled with false paths. For years, the island has drawn explorers in, only to leave them searching without clear answers. Now, consider the wooded area beyond the money pit. When Vanessa Lucido talks about exploring it, it's not random curiosity. That part of the island hasn't been investigated as deeply as the rest. It's like an untouched chapter, quiet, overlooked, but possibly important. While most attention has been focused on the money pit, some of the most unusual discoveries have actually come from outside it. Hidden tunnels that don't match known maps. Wooden structures that seem too advanced for their supposed time period. These weren't found in the obvious places. They were found where few people thought to look. The island doesn't give up its secrets easily. There are long stretches with no discoveries at all. Then suddenly, something appears where nothing should exist. A piece of chain, a leather strap, a carved stone with precise markings. And these items aren't near the surface. They're buried deep, suggesting that whoever placed them had time, tools, and a clear purpose. It's not just what is found, it's where and how it's found that matters. For decades, the story of Oak Island has centered around treasure, gold, jewels, pirate legends. But that idea may be too simple. As more unusual discoveries emerge, it's becoming harder to ignore a different possibility. The island might be hiding something far more significant than wealth, something that could change how we understand history. Look at the structures alone. Beneath this small island are engineered tunnels, flood systems, and carefully designed drainage paths. These aren't random holes dug by amateurs. They show knowledge of engineering, an understanding of water flow, pressure, and structural support that seems advanced for the time. Even more puzzling, some of these techniques don't clearly match any known civilization from the periods they're believed to come from. They appear earlier than expected, using methods that shouldn't have existed yet. Then there are the wooden platforms found deep underground, over 100 feet down. Carefully arranged, evenly spaced, and preserved for centuries. That kind of work isn't accidental. It suggests intention, either to protect something or to contain it. This is where Vanessa's thinking shifts the perspective. Maybe Oak Island isn't just a hiding place. Maybe it's a vault. Not necessarily for treasure, but for knowledge. Objects, information, or materials that someone deliberately wanted removed from the world. consider the fragile parchment that was discovered. Something like that shouldn't survive underground unless it was protected. The same goes for the cross, the shoe, and the gemstones. These items don't seem randomly buried. They seem intentionally preserved, almost as if they were meant to last. And here's where it gets even more interesting. If artifacts from different time periods are being found across the island, that suggests multiple groups may have used the Silmacan over time, not as a one-time burial site, but as a place revisited again and again, almost like a relay point, a location where something was passed along or safeguarded by different people, all sharing a common goal: secrecy. Think about it this way. Throughout history, knowledge has often been hidden or suppressed. Early maps, scientific ideas, and discoveries were sometimes buried or lost, not by accident, but intentionally. What if Oak Island is one of those places where such knowledge was hidden? Now, returning to 10X. When Dan Blankenship excavated that shaft, his goal wasn't just depth, it was discovery. He believed something was down there, something solid, possibly metallic, and sealed. Camera footage from deep inside showed shapes that looked like chambers or tools. But the deeper they went, the more dangerous it became. Flooding, collapses, and strange readings made further exploration difficult. It almost felt as if the island was resisting, protecting whatever lay beneath. Now, Vanessa is revisiting that same area with fresh eyes. As she studies old maps, sonar scans, and drilling records, she's noticing inconsistencies. Spaces that don't match natural geology, traces of metal where there should only be soil, and pressure patterns that suggest hidden chambers. Not natural voids, but constructed spaces. And if that's true, then the mystery of Oak Island may be far bigger than anyone originally believed. If this idea is true, if beneath 10X, or behind the money pit, there are sealed chambers built long before modern history, then it raises a serious issue. It would mean that someone in the past had access to knowledge or technology far more advanced than we usually give them credit for. And that shifts the story completely. This wouldn't just be about pirates or hidden treasure anymore. It would point to something much older and far more complex. That's where the mystery becomes uncomfortable. If Oak Island is just one location in a larger network of places designed to hide knowledge, then the obvious questions follow. Who built them and why? There are many theories. Some believe the Knights Templar reached North America long before Christopher Columbus. Others suggest the island could be hiding lost texts, possibly even connected to something like the Library of Alexandria. There are also ideas that ancient builders may have used the island itself as a kind of data system, encoding information into the land using geometry and alignment. It might sound far-fetched, but then again, so did the idea of a massive, hand-built flood tunnel over 100 feet deep, until evidence showed it was real. Another detail that often gets overlooked is the island's unusual magnetic behavior. Compasses don't always point correctly. GPS signals can become unreliable. Equipment sometimes malfunctions without a clear reason. That's not typical. If someone wanted to protect something hidden underground, especially something mechanical or sensitive, they might try to interfere with detection. Creating distortions in the surrounding environment could make it harder to locate what's buried. It would confuse sensors and slow down anyone searching. Some areas of the island feel especially strange, particularly the woods behind the money pit. Vanessa Lucido has noted that equipment behaves unpredictably there. Signals bounce, readings shift, and the deeper the investigation goes, the less consistent things become. Every time something new is found on Oak Island, people try to explain it. Pirate activity, colonial history, shipwreck debris. But what if the real story isn't about objects being lost or misplaced? What if it's about information being deliberately hidden, or even erased? That's the pattern Vanessa is starting to notice. Not because of one single discovery, but because of how everything connects. Each find reveals part of a bigger story, but never the whole thing. It's as if the island reveals just enough to spark curiosity, then goes quiet again. It doesn't feel like a place that tells a clear story. It feels like a place where stories have been intentionally broken apart. That's why the wooded area behind the money pit is so important. Unlike other parts of the island, it hasn't been heavily excavated or disturbed. Its history hasn't been reshaped by repeated digging. And now, it's beginning to reveal subtle clues. It started with small changes, slight differences in ground-penetrating radar readings, unusual soil patterns, and areas of resistance just below the surface. These didn't look like natural formations such as sinkholes or erosion. They resembled voids, possible chambers or constructed spaces. Now consider all the evidence together. The shoe dated to 1492. The preserved parchment, the cross and ornate artifacts precisely built underground structures, strange magnetic interference and data from 10X suggesting large unnatural pressure zones. Individually, each of these might be explainable. But together, they point towards something intentional, something designed. This isn't random. It looks more like architecture. And that's the direction Vanessa is moving in. Instead of repeating the same digging patterns as before, she's expanding the search, looking at the island as a whole system rather than isolated spots, letting the evidence guide the next steps. Because this might not be about hidden wealth at all. It might be about control, about protecting knowledge, limiting access, or preserving something meant to stay hidden. Oak Island may not contain just one secret. It could be holding many, not a single treasure chest, but an entire archive buried beneath layers of allard. A place designed to mislead, to confuse, and to protect whatever lies below. And maybe that's why it has taken so long to reach any clear conclusion. Perhaps the people who built it didn't want recognition. They didn't want their work to be easily understood. Instead, they may have left behind just enough evidence to spark curiosity, but not enough to be fully believed. That's what makes it so difficult. Over the past 2 centuries, countless explorers, historians, and treasure hunters have come to Oak Island. Enormous amounts of time, money, and effort have been invested, yet no definitive answer has emerged. Why? Maybe because the truth isn't meant to be easy to find. Maybe the design itself is meant to slow people down, overwhelm them with possibilities, and eventually push them to give up, unless they approach it the right way. That's why Vanessa's approach stands out. She isn't just chasing objects, she's studying patterns, how discoveries connect, where they appear, and what the land itself might be revealing. What she sees is both fascinating and unsettling. Not randomness, but a system. Something carefully constructed by people who understood geometry, secrecy, and long-term planning. A system capable of preserving information for centuries, possibly even longer. And if Oak Island is just one part of something larger, one site among many, then the implications become even bigger. Because if even one of these places contains knowledge or technology from a civilization we don't fully understand, it could challenge everything we think we know about history. So the real question might not be whether Oak Island holds treasure. It might be whether it's protecting a truth, one that's been hidden for so long because it's too disruptive to ignore.